Welcome to a special 5-part Brave Feminine Leadership series where we dive into learning about ADHD. I'm joined by 5 successful female leaders who all have diagnosed ADHD. I'm deeply curious to understand their stories and learn both how they've learned to thrive in a neurotypical world and how, as leaders, we can keep building cultures where everyone belongs and everyone reaches their highest potential. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Dr. Oli Sophie Meredith. Oli, welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for having me on.
Brilliant to have you here. Let me share with our audience, for the people that haven't had the pleasure of meeting you before, let me just give them a little bit of information about you and then we'll get going on our conversation. So Dr. Oli Sophie Meredith is an autistic and ADHD non-binary woman, originally from England, living on Ngunnawal land. She's a public health academic at Charles Sturt University, currently leading a cross-institutional project entitled Hiding or Thriving: The Lived Experiences and Coping Strategies of Women and Gender Diverse People with ADHD. Fascinating, Oli. Oli is also a poet, a Reiki master and yogi, and is a big advocate for bringing all of who you are into wherever you are, the gnarly bits and all, and she never wants to retire. So I'm joining you from East Kulin Nation, and I never want to retire either. How exciting is that?
That's very cool.
So let's share with the audience, Oli, who are you as a human being? How do you answer that question?
It's a massive question. I think one of the things that's integral to my life is about health and well-being. And ironically, but not ironically, and I'm sure a lot of people listening would agree, that's connected to lots of experiences of not being well as well. And that's sort of sparked my interest in health and well-being. And it's been a long journey for me through various illnesses and learning lots of things like Reiki and yoga, but also eventually becoming a public health academic to help people and to I sort of sense into a different way of being. And those ways are all there. But I think just the mainstream perhaps is sort of going in a different direction sometimes. I'm also a mum, got 2 gorgeous kids, and I love everything about that. Well, that's a bit of a lie, isn't it? It's often hard. I love everything about that. No, I don't. I did not this morning getting them to school. But yeah, I do. It's a big part of who I am, probably. Yeah, I love physical activity, movement, dance, music, and I guess my big thing in life is about trying to follow your passion. And sometimes I fail at that and don't do that. But things tend to go awry when I'm pushing things that aren't really from the heart. So yeah, that's a nice synopsis of who I am.
That is a lovely synopsis of who you are. So let's step through. So originally from the UK, how did the journey, let's step through that journey. You alluded to a few things in there about health along the way and those things. So let's navigate that. And also I love the honesty straight off the bat with the kids. So to all of our kids listening, we really do love you. But gosh, there's some moments, aren't there?
Yeah, there certainly are. Yeah.
So
for them too.
Them too, exactly. So back to the UK and or you tell us your story.
Yeah, so I went to university, did arts degrees, masters at University of London, grew up in Stratford upon Avon. And I remember when I was at university studying political ideology, I was really interested in Darwin and Darwinism and all sorts of aspects to do that. But I remember Darwin actually saying himself, which seems so obvious to me that wasn't true, that somehow because all his bookshelves were lined with the male authors, that was sort of evidence for their superior intelligence. And that's not so long ago. And I kind of found that hilarious. And also it just made me start to think about just those structural inequalities that were so ingrained that people really started to take that for granted and believed that. And I moved to Cambodia at some point and worked in conflict transformation. And I unfortunately got very ill. I got dengue fever and then I got this thing called chronic fatigue syndrome, which some people have heard of, but some people just dismiss.
Yeah.
But that went around for about 6 years for me. And that was while I was in Cambodia. It's very difficult to work and operate. And I discovered over time that a lot of women had got this, men and women. It affects women more than men. But dentists, athletes, I've had friends who were all kinds of level of society, hardworking people who were just dismissed and put to one side, or they just weren't answers, but it wasn't put as a priority. And I became a yoga teacher then whilst doing that in Cambodia. I trained in Cairns. That's the first time I came to Australia. I came over to do that because I wanted to learn for myself more about the body. Like I was very much a thinking person and not a being person so much. And that was a big change for me. But I wanted to be able to do more. The more I read and learned, I wanted to be able to make a change. So then I went from the arts to doing a PhD in public health in Australia, which, was like learning about statistics and things I hadn't done before. But I wanted to be able to have this clout, I suppose, to sort of to learn about, hear and share women's and gender diverse and everyone's, but voices, people who haven't been listened to in health and wellbeing, especially. And so that's where I've come to, and that's most of my research. I'm in a research project for regional women's health, a RAW group, which is called RAW, the group, which is fantastic. I do research on how women are involved in physical activity and sport and the barriers to involvement in sport. And my project that I'm really interested in at the moment is around ADHD and women's involvement in self-care, I suppose, not involvement, their self-care and their coping strategies for ADHD.
So many things you've said there that I want to pick up. I mean, I just think about most of our audience are probably going to be in that thinking headspace, and not so much in the being headspace. But you obviously, you healed along the way. You then went and did your public health and your PhD and all sorts of different things in that regard. Why are what's your perspective on why women's illnesses have been dismissed or treated as, why did it take so long for things like chronic fatigue and that to...
Look, I think that's a lot to do with the head to start with. So I can go down the gendered aspect, and there's some obvious reasons for that. But there are some broader things as well with that when we don't see something, we need evidence for things. Right. Just as a basic idea, I think. If someone says they've got cancer, it's clear and we know how we can deal with it. So I think there's a lot of things that may involve the mind as well, that may start, there's a lot to do with the amygdala potentially for why, we don't know for sure, but there's I think that's one reason, like people just, if they can't see it, they don't know the cure, then they don't want to know about it. But I don't necessarily think that's true for women. I think what's interesting and something to be celebrated is that because there aren't necessarily pharmaceutical responses, women actually, and sadly often unsuccessfully, and I know there's so many people out there who have got lifelong chronic fatigue syndrome, and I'm one of the lucky ones, so I just acknowledge that. But a lot of women will go and pursue other avenues for self-care and sometimes become well and actually find the connection between mind and body, and that and sometimes this isn't possible for people, but the lifestyles they've been living or the pressure they've been under and the stress they've been under, it's never going to heal if they carry on in that way. I think, I think there's probably a gendered thing as well, that women just need to suck things up. I think perhaps we have had historically that in society. It becomes high profile when it's noticed for men, but I say that knowing that as well, we dismiss a lot of things for men as well, like mental health, and I really love that has become a focus. So I've really changed how I think about that over the last. I would have had a different answer for you. Yes. Maybe more cynical, gendered kind of simplistic response in the past, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think women are actually much better at going and seeking help with psychologists, and I think people just don't have the answers. I do think a gendered aspect or an answer is, though, that we do go to these frontline medical responses hoping for the solutions quite quickly, and actually there have been maybe women's intuitive practices that have been suppressed over hundreds of years, and not women's, First Nations responses. We're very dismissive about complementary alternative medicine from other nations and other cultures, or I say other, cognizant, of course, all the cultures are Australian and Indigenous cultures, but naturally, perhaps that's time for those things to our understanding of those things to broaden a little bit. Some things that maybe seem intuitive, we talk about things like old wives' tales, and again, what I love in my position is that I do get to tap into science, and for me, it's bringing those two things together. And so, yes, you don't want the wild things that haven't been tested or understood on one level, but I think there is much more room for tapping in intuitively to what's going on in your body, rather than saying oh no, I'm in pain, which happens a lot sometimes for me at night. I have fibromyalgia, comes and goes. Just actually going, what's my body telling me, rather than popping a pill. And I still might pop a pill sometimes, but once after I've asked, what are you saying? And I think that to a lot of people that would sound a bit woo-woo. But I think I don't know if you've come across this, Melissa, as well. When you do get a serious illness, that's when you actually start to listen.
Yes.
You're forced to, and then you actually do hear your body talk.
That was my journey. I think when you and I first connected, I shared that with regards to breast cancer. So, and that was where I picked up earlier when you spoke about that shift from kind of doing to being, from in your head to in your body.
Yes,
exactly. So super powerful. So, Oli, take me back. When did you get your diagnosis?
Look, I think it was about a year and a half ago. I'd known for quite a long time. I think I'd heard Hannah Gadsby talking about like her diagnosis, and it was like, I don't know, that must have been 5 or 6 years ago. And I was on a bus somewhere, and I remember her talking about it and saying the relief she felt. She described all these symptoms, and I just burst into tears. And it was just revelatory. And it didn't matter in that moment about diagnosis or not diagnosis. It was like, it explains everything. And I think sometimes until you have someone else, and that's leadership as well, until you have someone else share their experience, you're not aware of your experience. You're so busy with the mask that you are the mask. You're so busy holding that mask that you are in. I really was that mask.
What did she say, Oli? What did she say that, like, what were the things that you heard her say that really resonated?
To be honest, it's a long time ago, so I can't actually remember. But I imagine it.
That's okay. Keep going.
Yeah, I imagine it would have been about not fitting in, but having a mask in the first place. And there's so many things about forgetfulness and trying to do things in a linear way, and the exhaustion. I think the exhaustion that it takes to be neurodiverse. And I always remember her talking about like queer people as well being expected to be dancing on the streets, and I do love that celebration, but actually what she wanted really was just quiet time and a cup of tea. And I've got two sides of me. I've got a very much ADHD side and an autistic side, and not that they're quite linear like that either, but I can be both, which I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people. Sometimes I'm quite introvert, sometimes very extrovert. But she was just real, and she was just I can't actually remember, to be honest, but the pressures to be neurotypical, to remember things a certain way, to do anything that you're not passionate about, the struggle that takes. And how people, again, we've gone from Hannah Gadsby now, but now I'm talking about my experience, how people sort of feel like you've let them down, and take it personally when you've forgotten something, or you've missed a detail, and the dread you feel when that comes, because you really love someone, or you really care about your work situation, and it's not negligence, it's just overwhelm.
So let's go to the mask, because one of the things you said, a couple of things to me that were really interesting. One was that you thought you weren't a leader. You'd kind of given up on leadership. I really want to explore that. And then the other one was around your late diagnosis and how that kind of unlocked you feeling proud to actually take the mask off.
Yes. This is ADHD. What was the first thing you said?
So the first, that's okay. We'll do the first one and then I'll bring the second one in. So the first one, this is me learning. You thought you weren't a leader, so you'd given up on leadership.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because that's true and not true. So, and I think I've articulated that a little bit better since then. But I think that in terms of the pathway, so in academia, for example, becoming a professor, there's partly that I think it's quite an exhausting route. I don't know. I know I see a lot of people around me as well who are neurodiverse who aren't necessarily going to or don't feel they will that structure's for them. It's sort of too striving and just administrative, actually. And also, yeah, I don't necessarily feel like, and I have had some leadership roles, not like, 50 people stuff and things like that, but where I felt inauthentic. And maybe it's the situation I'm in, but I'm not someone who will be a leader and lead for the sake of leading. I think some people are naturally quite good at that. I think I might accidentally end up leading by being, as I was saying. And I think sometimes when you're so tapped into who you are and what you're passionate about, that brings people along. And I think that's the only way I would ever be a leader. Whereas I do look at some people who will go for a certain position or maybe just go and lead a company that hasn't been made by them and be brilliant and inspire people. And that's wonderful. I don't think that's who I am. I think, yeah, I don't necessarily see myself as a leader, but I think I probably quietly by being, there might be some people.
Well, and maybe if I flow on from there, because I think where you were going with it was that the realization that leadership, that you actually could, and you are leading by being your full self.
Oh, yeah, that's totally true.
So I mean, that links to the take the mask off. So
yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I think for me, like leadership feels like a burden in some way, has felt like a burden. So I've had, jobs where I have been a leader and it has felt like a burden. I think when I have taken the mask off. So for example, we have this, well, I'm in the one with UTS as well, 2 really good research groups, but the one I'm leading, this Hiding or Thriving one, with 7 women and all the researchers are neurodiverse. And so the first thing I said is just tell me who you are. And we sat in that room, we met for 2 days. We sat in that room for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, just talking about who we were. And we all look different to each other. Some people had met each other for the first time, but we all look different to each other because our masks were off, and it was so liberating. And I think even that, for me, I realized this is leadership, just to say this is who I am, and I began that process, and then for others to allow others to do that. And I've realized I definitely do that over the last few years, especially with my students as well. So I'm quite reflexive. And we'll sort of share my positionality, but I'll share when I make mistakes. I'll share when I ask for a bit of patience because remind me if this happens. And it's been beautiful because I've had so many students reach out, and they might say by email or contacting me and saying, actually, I'm neurodiverse, but also just a plethora of other things, so many things. And they will tell me the truth. They won't say the dog's eaten my assignment. They'll say, look, this is going on for me, and they get to be who they are. And I really feel like it helps them connect with the subject and not feel like they need to sort of pass another barrier of what is it my lecturer wants me to do. They actually get to start going, what does this assignment mean to me? And from that position, and I know this is true for my work, you produce amazing stuff. And so, yeah, it's a win-win for everyone that way. And so I feel like that's what I've learned, to be like that. And the more I do that in the workplace, the happier I am, the more I bring on other people. So when we go to retreats and things like that, as a yoga teacher as well, I will share like yoga with people, and I will talk about things like Reiki, which I used to be embarrassed to share with people. Yes. I'll be all of that now, and just be honest when I'm. So again, in the Hiding or Thriving group, we all meet up and say, sometimes people say, look, I'm hiding actually at the moment, but we all turn up to each other, like.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Just have that honest dialogue. It's really energizing, actually.
That's absolutely fantastic. So I love people's perspective on this, and I think you and I had an interesting sort of initial conversation about it. And, into this series I've been asking people, some people are very comfortable referring to a superpower. So their diagnosis has given them a superpower. What's your take on that, Oli?
Yeah, I'm mindful that some people really don't like that term. And, I guess generally I think everything's a bit more nuanced than that. But I do think there is a super side. Well, it's not just a super side. I don't work from a deficit model. I think being neurodiverse is wonderful. I think being neurotypical is wonderful. What's wonderful about talking about and naming neurodiversity is that then neurotypical people get to see themselves as well. And we all get to see ourselves on a spectrum, and we all get to understand each other better. And so I think with one amazing aspect of being neurodiverse is that, and a curse, is that if you are following your passions, you can just really fly. It does, well, this is my experience. I should really say this is just from my experience, and some people, lots of colleagues and friends. If you're not doing that, you can really struggle. And so there's lots of reasons we don't need to go into now, but to do with the brain that might happen. The chemicals that are being produced that we are low on if someone is neurodiverse. It's not just an oogie boogie idea. And so you can really, and so we've got this idea that we often will hyper-focus and have this ability to hyper-focus. If your lifestyle doesn't allow that, that can be really difficult. You don't have supportive people in something you're passionate about, that can also be really, really difficult. Like and parenthood, and again, I adore parenthood and it's the best thing ever. But you can't sort of work through the night, for example. And so for me, I could be thinking on something for 2 or 3 days and then suddenly need to plow through the night. And I think people like, some of the major geniuses in our history are neurodiverse, Einstein, Beethoven, but they would probably usually be equipped with a wife who'd be cooking for them and doing all that stuff, and maybe in a social sort of cultural socioeconomic group where they had enough status to allow them to only focus on one thing, and they were probably rubbish at everything else. And so I think for women that's a bit especially difficult, being neurodiverse, because you're expected to be a jack of all trades, so you're expected to be doing a bit of everything. That's really overwhelming for anyone. And I actually think, neurodiversity, again, just opens up the conversation, not just for neurodiverse people, for all of us who are doing too much at once. You can't do it well. But actually, we're sort of also, as neurodiverse people, sort of missing what could be our greatest strength, just be able to focus on one thing at a time, or one or two real superpower strengths, your passions.
So how do you do that? Because all of those obligations don't go away, how do you actually create the space to enable you to flourish and get the most out of that, key area of passion or focus?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a beautiful question. You use the word space, and it is about creating space. For me, getting up before the kids, and I've got this mat that I've had. It's an extra long yoga mat. It's huge, and it's lovely and thick, and I've had it for 20 years or something like that, and it goes everywhere with me, and it's like my special space. But it is making time and space. So before the kids get up, I will do maybe yoga, maybe dance. It changes all the time. Whatever I need to do, meditation, but I'll hear myself at some point on that mat. It doesn't happen every day, but most days I have that practice of doing something there, and I'll hear myself, and I'll hear what I need. And I might not always get it, but just knowing that self-reflection, I think it causes less damage in the workplace too, because you actually, or in relationships, you think, oh, I'm feeling resentful for something, I need to do something about that. It helps you take responsibility for things. So that's, and also, I think for neurodiversity too, it gives me a little moment to calm down from the overwhelm, from the to-do list. And it might just give me a moment to go, okay, well, you've got a million things on, you poor thing. Like, no, you're stressed. Why don't you just put one of them down and, just put the rest off for a different day, or, kind of do a deal with yourself. But it's making space.
Yeah. Some people journal, right? Same thing.
I often do journaling from that same space. Like, I'll have a green tea or something down there, but my journal comes there as well. It doesn't always get opened, but yeah.
The mat sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a what's that thing? It's not Kindle. It's Remarkable. Have you come across a
Oh yes, I've
Remarkable?
got Remarkable.
Remarkable is really good for ADHD because it's simple. I used to have journals all over the place, and I can organize myself there. And I spend a lot. So my mat and my Remarkable are two like really good strategies to help me with that. And I've learned to say, I've got this need, make it happen. Maybe not today. You need to go for sometimes I might go for a short hike or a cycle, or I do
Yes.
a lot of cycle. Nature has been huge, and that I've fallen in love with nature more and more over the years. And oh my God, it's just there for us, and it's so rejuvenating. And it sounds cliche to probably someone who hasn't really tapped into that, but the more you do it, the more you ground. Um, yeah, you just remember who you are, and you start to follow what you're interested in, and actually put that first in your list of the day, or somewhere up top in terms of your priorities, making sure at least you get that one thing that you're passionate about.
So tell me what drives this big passion, and do you feel like you discovered it through your own health challenges, or was there a theme of a passion you were following before that?
I feel like I was probably going upstream. I was, quite a fun-loving person, quite a happy person as a kid. Lots of challenges though, and I have CPTSD. So that's always been there under the surface. Which is interesting because then you develop your mask and you are a happy person, but there's other things going on. And I think at some point those things do come to, and lots of that happens to a lot of people in later life.
Mm.
It all sort of comes up. And so, but that happened to me well, actually, I had shingles as a kid. Like I had you look back and you think, actually, there were lots of health issues going on, but it was really the chronic fatigue syndrome crash that sort of forced me to look at myself and what I was doing, and was I doing things for this. I was working, as I said, in Cambodia at that time, but I also was trying to find what it was I was doing. I've been living in the financial district not living in, but working in the financial district in London, and it had been just a busy, horrible life, and I was making myself sick, and I was drinking a lot with, just socially, but with
Yeah.
colleagues, but I was miserable. Like I was just trying to cover it all. And so this, yeah, kind of forced me to realize who I was. And I was a lot quieter than I realized. Time by myself was something I actually realized that was safe and okay, and I actually quite liked. So I did have this real extrovert side, but there's
Mm.
actually all this softness inside me that I hadn't really, I used to joke about people. I can't imagine it now. I used to joke about people meditating and do kind of, I don't, yeah, I just used to be all that. I'm so different to who I am now.
Yeah.
And I just became safer and safer to connect with who I was underneath. And I think I've just learned a lot of love. And that's really, I don't know if it's even passion. It's just I feel a lot of love. I feel love for students, my colleagues. I feel like the more, I guess, less and less sort of positional in terms of goodies and baddies and things anywhere in my health research in life. And I know that's not always the case. I've got conflict like anyone else. I'm definitely not not some kind of Dalai Lama, no way. But I think that's sort of what drives my passion, is kind of um understanding we're all the same, really, and we all want the same stuff, and a lot of us are hurting ourselves.
Yeah, wow. What can we learn? You referred to First Nations earlier, and how, we just need
Mm.
that we can learn. What should we be paying attention to?
Look, as an English person
Yes.
and a non-Indigenous person, there's so much to learn. So I'm absolutely in awe of when I lived in Bathurst, the Wiradjuri elders there were so generous with their time and so kind. There's just so much to learn. So I wouldn't even begin to be able
That's
to
it.
articulate it in a very, very well. But I'll just give you a few things that I've learned,
Yes.
again, this way of being, I've learned it from a lot of people around me, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, but Indigenous people, so many First Nations people I've learned about being, rather than naming things and calling yourself a leader or telling people a hierarchy, of this concept of Yinjamara. I don't know if you've heard of Yinjamara. That's
Not in detail.
Wiradjuri people use
Yeah.
it, and it's about quietness, going slowly, kindness, but it's also about taking responsibility for your part in your ecosystem. So it's like there is no you without community. There is they're one and the same. So your actions do affect other people. And but they say that, I've heard the word, and that's a real gift, but it really is watching and seeing the ways of being that you get it. It's experiential. You can't learn that by someone telling you that in a textbook. You actually have to see, and the patience and the repeating again and again to loads of school groups, to community groups, to people in the community about the history and the patience they take to have these sort of racist, we've got institutional racism, but racist kind of questions, and explain again and again, gently, with kindness, with patience, to have, councils and government up against you again and again, but to keep coming back, that resilience, and still to be compassionate and loving. And there's so much love. I'm just absolutely blown away by that. And of course, again, there's conflict and dispute just like anywhere else, and anger and all those things that you totally understand. But there's also that thing about sort of, and again, I do this with my students. Even though we're on Zoom quite often, I'll say, let's imagine we're in a circle. Like I'm not the boss, and I want you to talk to each other and share our experiences. And I think, a lot of First Nations people come from that sort of approach of us take our time and all listen and respect each other as equals, but also honor elders as well, to be able to do both, to have that respect for people who might have more wisdom than you, to be open to that, to listen. I know I'm talking so much, but to be able to listen, there's so much patience. And that's, again, someone with ADHD who talks over people quite often and talk very fast. I'm learning so much, and I've got so much to learn, but I find that really beautiful and soothing and real.
Amazing. What do you wish everyone knew? So, when it comes to work environments or otherwise, what do you wish everyone knew to help people feel more included?
Well, I guess broadly speaking, just that everyone has a right to be loved, but I think everyone is innately lovable. I see a lot of people with trauma. So I've taught yoga for 15 years for people with chronic conditions, cancer, CPTSD, CFS, fibromyalgia, all those things. And often underneath, people really struggle with acceptance of love and self-love, that they've got to do something for it.
Right. They need to earn it.
You need to earn it. And I think, people who are neurodiverse have had lots of messages about not doing it right as well, and so then maybe are less lovable. And that's part of taking the mask off, of realizing, those were things that other people were telling me, not me. That was secondary information when I was saying you're not lovable, is actually, and then you start to be able to take control of it. So no matter what you have done or seen or experienced, or what position you are in, and or your whole history, even if you had 80 years of terrible history, like in this moment, in the present moment, you can tap into that knowledge that underneath, that's all bullshit really. Underneath, like there is, and this is totally cheesy, but there is only love. Like the rest is a fabrication. And I think, again, I'm saying I don't really believe in telling and sharing these things. It's only experiential that you actually learn that. And that's why I do still practice those modes of yoga and Reiki and things like that, because they're sort of physical, visceral ways to get that knowledge. Yes, you can read it, and that's a starting point, it's a signpost, but you have to, again, very cliche, but it's true, go within. And then you do eventually find that, underneath it all, you could just feel, in one moment you could feel like life is just not worth living, and the next moment just have your heart filled with love when you sort of release that block, whatever that block is, which is the ego. I wish everyone knew that. And then, because I think if everyone knew that, then we treat each other with that understanding that underneath that person is only love, even though they might sound like, they're really against you.
And I guess that leaves you in a space where you can be so generous with people as well. I mean, generous to yourself, but generous to other people too, which I think is a real hallmark of leadership. Assuming people have the best intent.
Totally, because I think, we're not, hierarchy doesn't actually, I'm not saying that we can't have things structured and yes, you make this decision, I make this decision, but hierarchy doesn't inspire anyone and doesn't innately inspire anyone. It is by being and allowing people to be themselves, listening. That's all anyone wants, is a space to be themselves. And then and that is interesting in this with neurodiverse group, neurodiverse students, when you acknowledge and say it's safe to be who you are, just people just blossom and bloom. And I think being a leader is stepping back and making space for listening to, letting people be who they are and shutting up sometimes.
Any other practical strategies you use to thrive? And I know you reference the exhaustion that can come from trying to operate in such a linear neurotypical.
Totally.
What do you do? I mean, we've heard there's space for yourself every day to kind of connect with you. What else do you do?
I think that's really important, and physical activity as well. I think the realization of how your mind works is so I feel like diagnosis for me has been the biggest. It's not a cure, because you almost don't need a cure. You just need to do things differently. And so it's the biggest permission slip, because then I realize I'm exhausted. My brain isn't working well at this moment. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm about to snap at someone, or just not make a good decision. Yeah. And so it is about learning to, so I might just realize I need to just step away from my computer for half an hour, and that it's okay to, some people I know are just, fantastic at working 9 till 5, for example, but it's okay to work in the evening, or sometimes get up really early, or catch up on weekends, which I've always worked like that, but I've always felt guilty that why can't I do it this way? And so I feel sort of, energized about being different and doing it different. And I'm sure, again, neurotypical and neurodiverse people both will resonate. That will resonate for them at different points, because life is, we kind of tried to structure the hell out of us in some ways, or we have done it to ourselves. But so it's just giving myself permission to tap into my body and ask what it needs. And I was thinking this again applies beyond neurodiversity. I know a lot of women, when they're menstruating, huge stuff is going on for their bodies, but we try and carry on working exactly the same way. But no, like, go and get your heat pack, lie down for a bit. You're going to work much, you give so much. Go and do that for a little while. And let it work in peaks and troughs. And we work like that. We're like women. We know this. We work with the seasons. Like, our body works with the seasons, with the moon. Like, allowing yourself to tap back into that stuff. And that's what I try and do. The mat gives me an opportunity to notice what I mean, but I do that, acting on that now. Awesome. And also, I recognize that thing about cortisol. So I used to feel really bad about doing things at the last minute, and so now I realize that's a bloody great strategy, because you are down on norepinephrine, you are down on dopamine, and that cortisol that's pumping through your body at that point, because it's a great coping mechanism, actually. So now I allow myself, rather than feeling guilty, I go, right, so I'm going to produce some of my best work in these 8 hours through the night, or whatever it is. And that's more than okay. And knowing that other people experience that same thing is totally liberating. And going, right, this is my golden hour now, or my golden night, or golden afternoon, or whatever it is.
Fantastic. So what are we going to learn? What are we going to learn out of this institutional project that you're leading right now? So the Hiding or Thriving project. What's some things, it's early, right? But are there some things that are exciting you out of that?
Thanks for asking the question and being interested in it. I'm actually working with ADHD Australia, who are supporting the project, and we're going to have various stages, and we're interviewing people firstly. And so we're just going to have 20 interviews, and then we're going to do a bigger survey, and a survey across Australia. So I'm really looking forward to hearing out how women look after themselves, or the experiences they've had, the barriers to well-being with ADHD. I'm interested because there really is just that frontline response again, that here's medications, which they can be great, but a lot of people take holidays from those medications because they have sleeping problems with them. A lot of people, actually, we know there's correlations with heart disease if you're taking them for a long time as well. So there's things that could really help children. Now, the thing with women is, and that, which we expect to find, is a lot of women who are diagnosed with ADHD weren't diagnosed until they were much older. Often it's after women, their kids have been diagnosed. So they've had like a whole wealth of coping without knowing what they even had. But I'm really interested to the insights about some things that we can actually use that could be really helpful. So perhaps they've learned to do physical activity early in the morning, or they automatically are doing these things that aren't, aside from medications, which are stimulant medications. So, like the more we can do other stuff as well. I'm not saying that to replace those, because they can be, really helpful for a lot of people. Then I think we can find some really interesting things, but also we might find some things which I found in other research when I was doing research on sleeping problems for women. Is a lot of things are going on that people don't share with their doctors in this case because they're not diagnosed. But in some cases, it's expensive to go to the doctors, and shame around saying what they are doing in their own time. And so some things, but maybe could not be working, could be paying a lot of money for, it's not working, or could even be dangerous in terms of herb and drug interactions, etc. But I'm really looking forward to just hearing women's voices and their experiences and sharing those and getting women to see their own voices on the paper, because women's symptoms can be quite different for ADHD, and we are, the social expectations of us to be a certain way that are different to boys. So this idea of, a boy in the classroom jumping off the walls isn't how it manifests for a lot of women. There's a lot of women who are inattentive and often seen as daydreamers, and would need necessarily different strategies for coping with that. So looking forward to amplifying those voices.
Amazing. Can't wait for that research to come out as well. The final question I ask everybody, and I can't stop thinking during this conversation, I can't stop thinking about leadership and how you just simply talked about, even with students, you're getting the honest reasons for them not submitting work and things like that. Like that's just through creating that space and being honest about who you are and all of the aspects of you is amazing. The final question I ask everyone is, what does brave feminine leadership mean to you? And do you think it needs to change?
That's a brilliant question. And I think my first thought about that is doing what you're doing, which is making spaces for other people, for sharing other people's voices. And when you have some privilege and power, using it that way rather than making your voice bigger. And so I think that's a beautiful thing you're doing. And I think that for me, that is real leadership, and that's brave. And it also, I think, as I alluded to about the students, acknowledging your own weaknesses gives space not only for other people to do the same, but also gives space in the community for other people to step up with their strengths. Right. And then because you give them acknowledgement by saying, I'm not very good at that. So, and then someone else can say, well, actually I am, rather than trying to go say, oh, that's not important, I'm not good at it, so we won't focus on that. So I think that really diminishes creativity. And I think as I was saying earlier as well, that I think leadership is about feminine leadership is about being brave enough to tap into your intuition and lead with that in the workspace. So I think I love the word brave feminine leadership, because I think feminine, and I think about this from a yogic perspective, not from a gender perspective. Feminine being about receptivity, listening, receiving. We need way more of that. And again, that's something I've learned from Indigenous First Nations people and other people around me. Definitely need way more of that. But masculinity, again, in that sort of sense, is about, leadership itself. So kind of, for me, that means both, and it means balance. And then bravery is probably it's even harder. The intuitive, the feminine side has been squashed over these few hundred years, I think, especially colonial times in Australia. And so I see a lot of First Nations people who I think are leading with that femininity, which is talking about compassion and love, and actually tapping into being able to be present, I think, in any situation by saying, this isn't working in this moment. I don't care what our policy says. I mean, we do have to care about policies, but, you need to go home, or it's okay that you get this in for me, it's okay you get this in 2 days late, because I see what's really going on for you. So I think the bravery is being able to do those things and stand up to institutions and boards or whatever it is and say, look, that's what it required at this time. It was real, it was authentic. So I think that's the feminine masculine balance that we kind of I want to be looking for.
It's amazing, Oli. Oli, thank you so much for joining our conversation. It's just been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with you, and I know people will have taken so many things out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, Melissa. Thanks for what you're doing.